would we want to be involved on any level. And I think it would be important to have sort of personal experiences as to where we enter. What does that civic involvement look like? For me, it's a civic involvement of liberation, empowerment. Not just because I'm an American citizen, I need to go vote, but because I'm an African American citizen, I need to vote to make sure my communities are being built and empowered. So I want to pass the mic, and first I want Jackie DuPont Walker to tell us a little bit about what she's doing and how she enters in with this idea of Black communities and public policy.
Thank you, Kamala, and to those who were coming in as she was talking, since I had paid you to show up, I'm glad you finally showed up. Was a little confusion with that. How did I get started? Let me just say that I'm pleased to be here as the mother of Kamala Hayward wrote to me, and I hope that a part of what she's doing is a part of what she saw happening in her family. I'm also the daughter of King Solomon DuPont, who was one of the leaders of the little-known Tallahassee bus boycott that occurred at the same time as the Montgomery bus boycott, and a part of the legacy of Richard Allen, who is considered the founder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. So I have to say that I probably had no choice. It was a part of my destiny that I would be doing this. Yet I have 4 siblings who God has given another walk to. It is absolutely a joy and a source of frustration, but knowing that I can't not do this work because it is a part of my life's calling. And I know that for many of you here today, it is. You may be struggling with how and what you're supposed to do. It is no accident that you're in this session, and we hope that you leave different than when you came in. My daughter wants me to tell her mother what to do, so I'm going to do that. She wants me to tell you a little bit of what I do. I am the founding president of Ward Economic Development Corporation, which is a not-for-profit community development organization in South Central Los Angeles, we now call South Los Angeles. We defame the name under one name and we cure it under another. It is still South Central Los Angeles. What we did out of a sense of our faith community being a neighborhood that was changing by ethnic and cultural identity in the throes of a major university, the University of Southern California, and knowing our destiny as a part of the African Methodist Episcopal Church to speak for all people, we needed to find out what we were called to do. And so our pastor at the time, some 30 plus years ago, challenged us to go into our own pockets, pay for trips around the country to look at churches who had similar kinds of issues. We went to Wheeler Avenue Baptist in Austin, Texas. We went to Metropolitan Baptist in Washington, D.C. We traveled to Allen AME in Jamaica, Queens, New York. We went to Trinity United Church of Christ in Chicago, to Allen Baptist in Oakland, and then back in Los Angeles. And we knew that we were not to move, we were to stay and try to make a difference. And so we have built affordable housing, which we now manage. We've encouraged small businesses, especially legacy businesses, to remain in the neighborhood and to try to find resources to help them be viable, and to say to residents of the community whose median income is 20% below the city's median, that you can make a difference in the quality of life. And so when she said come, I wanted to come because I'm proud of her, but I cannot tell you what a blessing this has been, because I hope the next conference is going to be on the West Coast, and we'll be inviting you to come, and the organizers will accept our invitation. We'll find sponsors, because I see this in the spirit of the Black conventions that were started in the 1800s. They traveled around the country to awaken the spirit of the African diaspora as well as people of goodwill to the fact that racism was alive and well, and tragically still is. And so for us today to look at the Black communities that have survived from a spirit that we could not create, and to look at what we're called to do at this time. answer the question, why are we here at this time, and what are we called to do?
That's hard to follow, but I will try. So I will open up by saying that I am a biological anthropologist. I identify as a bioculturalist, so that means that I am more or less an academic, and I have encountered all of the struggles that academics often do in terms of making your work socially relevant. And so luckily, when I was kind of at the end of undergraduate school, I went to Howard University, and I was in the right place in the right time to participate in the New York African Burial Ground Project, which was focused on very much so community-driven research project looking at these enslaved Africans who were buried in Lower Manhattan between 1720 and 1790. Now, that happened 20-some, now I guess years ago. The burial ground was discovered in 1991. And since then, there really haven't been many projects that mirrored it in terms of the bridging of community activism and research. And those of us who are part of the project continue to look for ways to make that work that we did 20-some years ago relevant, and to make the model of research that came out of it, bridging the university, the academic and activist communities, to mirror that in the present day. And so what I'm involved in my DMV area, Washington, D.C. area, is working with a church, a Baptist church, that is kind of like the last remaining, last vestige of the Black community that was in an area that's now considered to be very affluent, right? And to the point where the Black presence has really been erased. People have no idea that it was once a Black community. But this church still stands there. And like so many other places in the suburbs of DC, there's a lot of development planned for this area, and some of that development is going to involve redesecrating a burial ground that's associated with the church. And so the church members called on the former scientific director of the African Burial Ground Project, and he kind of dragged me into it, to assist with using academic research and the presentation of academic questions, right? The development and presentation of academic questions and implementing academic research to the Parks and Planning Commission to get them to change their policies around how they make decisions regarding development. One of the huge problems, one of the egregious errors on the part of Parks and Planning, was leaving the church community and other descendants of the once Black community there out of the decision-making process altogether. And so I'm happy to report, and I'll be happy to provide details during our Q&A, that through the kind of implementation of this academic research and posing particular academic questions, we were able to kind of halt the process, in a manner of speaking. And I'm happy also to report that now the church is really, they are involved in the political campaigns that are going on now, where like the church is actually housing some of the Q&A sessions that are going on for the council and county executive. So, it's just been a great kind of journey and learning experience in terms of understanding how academic research can actually be useful in ways that we really didn't imagine. We didn't really know. So that's my story.
So my mother already spilled the beans. I was going to be a little bit more dramatic, saying that we were related. But my story, I basically grew up in a household where it wasn't a question that you would be involved civically. I'm not ashamed of my age. I went to the Free South Africa marches with my parents. I remember going with them into different communities in Watts, and them being involved in different employment workshop projects. And so I grew up also knowing that this was something that you were supposed to do. I also saw my mother run for office, you know, as a commissioner, helped her with the campaign. I did all that when I was growing up in LA. I grew up and moved away. I live here in Durham, North Carolina, and I will say that probably for about at least 15 years, I was undercover, not being involved at all civically. I voted, but I sort of backtracked. I don't know if it was like an extended vacation. And so I then one day, actually it was Jillian Johnson's run for council that sort of woke me up. And I'm like, I grew up knowing that if you're a part of the community, even if you don't like what's going on, you need to do something to make sure in concert that there's marching and policy. Like, what happens after you finish marching? How do you make sure that you have something in place that's going to actually be a legal response to what is going on? So, as a result of waking up, I think this past August I was appointed as a commissioner to the Durham Open Spaces and Trails Commission here in Durham. And that was a little interesting because, you know, I love the environment, but I wouldn't exactly say that I was ready to put on the hat of being an advocate, at least definitely not an expert. But I didn't realize how many different ways the environment intersected with Black communities and how we were not at the table. I go to some committee meetings and I'm the only Black person there. And so I realized that I have to hurry up and learn what this represents and what the connection is of Black communities to their environment and green spaces. Also, I mentioned earlier that I'm the executive director and founder of the Knowledge Exchange Research Group. It's an international group that we like to say we bring theory and academic research to inform policy. So as a digital anthropologist, what's important to me is to study how people of color and people of the African diaspora interact with digital knowledge. So one of the projects that we're working on is to try to figure out how to improve e-library and digital repositories for African universities. So the strands stretch here and there, but I realized that for there to be some real community building for Black people, which is what is important to me, that I have to be there, and even after taking a vacation. So if anybody's wondering if it's too late to get involved, you know, within your local and national, it never is. So I actually wanted to ask both of you a few questions. So the first one is, how would you define public policy for Black communities and its purpose for African diaspora communities, or why should Black communities influence public policy?
All right. You take it. No, you take it. So one of the things that I didn't mention when I was sharing a little bit about myself is that the tradition of working with communities to develop academic questions and conduct academic research is a part of the African diasporic tradition of scholar activism. And that really doesn't allow for disciplinary or any kind of really social or cultural boundaries to kind of separate or segregate activities that are ultimately all geared toward the liberation of our people. And so one of the things that I think about when I think about how to define public policy and why it's important for us, one of the things that I think needs to kind of be put at the forefront of our implementation of policy is this lack of boundaries, right? That, right, academics are involved in public policy, activists and community folk are involved in public policy, in various ways. So I think that is a key piece. One of the reasons why we need to be involved is because, kind of going back to these burial grounds and these cemeteries, we're invisible. People don't think about our bodies, our lives mattering in the past or in the present. There's a really, there's a continuum, right, that needs to be disrupted. And I see the work that I do being very much so connected to kind of using people's past lives and people who are no longer with us, the lives of ancestors, and kind of bringing their lives to the forefront to create this connection between our lives and theirs, right? And to kind of highlight the ways in which some things have perhaps changed, but there are a lot of things that continue to stay the same, right? And there are ways in which policies and procedures that are developed around protecting cemeteries and burial sites can actually be used as an avenue to address concerns of living people, right? So for instance, the same church is connected to a town that's nearby where there are still, folks who were descendants of emancipated enslaved folk there to this day. And they did not have running water up until like the 70s. I mean, we've all kind of heard the stories. And what's very interesting is that in terms of the media, there's been all of this focus on the cemetery. And I'm thinking, okay, there are living people 2 feet to the left that you're completely ignoring. So we also have to keep in mind that there's a way in which cemeteries and burial grounds can be employed that actually obscures, right, what's going on with living people. And so again, I think that there's a way that I've learned that academic research can assist with kind of bridging those two kind of worlds, if you will.
Let me start by answering the second part. We need to be involved because there is no aspect of our life that is not impacted by public policy. And often people don't think about it. We were reminded with Flint that the quality of water we drink, that we trust our government's provided, is dictated by public policy. Recently, I discovered that someone we think of as very conservative and not caring about us, Mitch McConnell, represents a county where the water is as impure as Flint. Yet that wasn't a piece that anyone cared about. We don't know what he's doing about it. But more than anything else, my training is in social work. And when I completed my MSW, I took traditional jobs, medical social work, psychiatric social work, and then I felt, in my apologies to my colleagues in the field, that I was teaching people to adapt to sick systems. I said, okay, let me claim my community organizing piece. And there are many professions that teach us to be questioning of policy that's in place that affects people's lives. I like to believe, because the African diaspora has suffered in so many different ways, that there is a sensitivity that we have and we bring to public policy that's extremely important and very inclusive. And so often we react to poor policy that is in place because our perspective was not at the table. And many times we react as if it was an intentional oversight, but often that voice is not there. Just to give an example, I served on the Charter Commission of the City of Los Angeles. That's our constitution. And that was the elected office my daughter mentioned. During the discussion of the charter, I was called to be informed that because of the low percentage of African Americans in the City of Los Angeles, that the charter was going to be written in such a way there would not be 3 council seats left, only 1. And I said, why? And they kept trying to explain it to me, and finally meeting with a high-level official who showed me the demographics. And I thanked him very much. I told him I didn't come there to be a part of a decrease. And so I said to my council member, for those 3 seats, I will go. And so little did I know he was going to take me up on it, but redistricting happened. He looked around, he said, I need you to go fight. And it was a fight. And because no one wanted to look at African American elected representatives as being capable of representing everyone, We could only represent people who looked like us. Reminded me of the recent Congressional Black Caucus meeting with number 45, when he asked how could there be so many of them with so few African Americans, and they had to explain to him that they represented people who were not African Americans. He's not the only one who thinks that. And so I like to think we have to be at the table to bring the perspective that is often very inclusive, that is informed by some of the poor policies and racist policies that existed, and even the foundation that somehow the residual of some of those policies are in place and people fail to remember from whence they came. And so we have to be, public policy is everything that has governed us, even beyond the official definition of governing. It is reflected in our faith communities, it's reflected in our education system, it's reflected in our healthcare system, and so we have to be there in order to correct the ship.
One of the things that I hear in both of what you're talking about as far as Black communities and public policy and being involved is, Rachel, you were talking about invisibility of the Black community. And obviously, if we're getting involved on some level with public policy, we want visibility, right? We want to be visible as a community. I was about to say mom. You were talking about how we need to be at the table. So what that makes me think of in both of those points is the exhaustion as Black people, right? I mean, where do you find the drive and the inspiration besides knowing that you have to do it, to continue to be involved, to be at the table, to fight for the visibility?
I'll start with gatherings like this. It is knowing that so many others who are concerned about the same thing that makes me go back and struggle a little bit longer. But the other piece is looking for someone to pass the baton to. As a baby boomer, I'm looking at the Gen Xers and the millennials and trying to pour everything that I have found into them that they can accept or reject, but they can't say they didn't hear it. And so I think that the main thing that keeps us going is remembering the shoulders on which we stand. I mentioned the Black conventions of the 1800s, where they came together 50 years before the Emancipation Proclamation to talk about the same topics we're talking about now. And Richard Allen was age 81 when he agreed to chair, so he didn't give up. And that's just, okay, we can't give up on this. But I think more than anything else, it is knowing that something we can do will make a difference. And watching you claim that. No matter where we are in the world now, there is absolutely the need for the African diaspora to speak and speak loudly. And a large part of what we speak about is not the talking, it is the acting, it is finding and resurfacing the history that others don't know. Hearing today about a Black town in North Carolina that I had never heard about and talking to people, it's like having a gift from our ancestors saying, you can do this. And I think that's where we are in this nation, but in the world. I don't need to, in fact, I'm resisting. I received a gift at Christmas, the genealogy kit, so I can find out where I came from on the continent of Africa. I have so enjoyed claiming the entire continent and saying I look Senegalese, I'm Ghanaian, I'm Ethiopian. I have not, as people of the African diaspora in this country, we lost something when we were not able to make that direct connect. We actually gained something because we could claim an entire continent. And so the energy to keep going